Good evening. My name is Phyllis Wise, and I'm the provost here at the University of Washington, and I really want to welcome you here. This is the beginning, the climax, the middle of a wonderful journey that we are on to really focus increased attention both in our research programs and in our teaching of global health, global affairs, the importance of our role as a public university in educating the next generation of leaders who will go out to the world and be truly leaders in transforming our understanding of global health. We have appointed a new vice provost for global affairs, a brand new position, Dr. Susan Jeffords, and I hope that we have great hopes that she will in fact be able to focus our attentions in this area, amplify all of our efforts, coordinate them and integrate them so that they have maximum impact. It's my pleasure this evening to introduce Dr. David Fleming. He is the Director of Global Health Strategies at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, has been absolutely instrumental in crafting their vision and how they contribute to this. And as I'm sure you all know, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has given more money to global health than even the WHO. David comes from the CDC a few years ago, I believe, and is now leading this effort. He is also an affiliate faculty member here in our university at the University of Washington, and so is one of our own in addition to all of his duties and responsibilities at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Please, David.
Thank you, Phyllis, for that great introduction. I really have a double honor tonight. My first honor is to introduce Kavita Ramdas, who's going to be speaking to us. My second honor, though, was to have dinner with her before the lecture tonight. And I can tell you from that experience that we are all in for a special treat over the next hour and a half. Kavita is the president and the CEO of the Global Fund for Women. The Global Fund for Women is the largest grant-making foundation in the world that focuses exclusively on supporting women's human rights. In her role, Kavita searches out and marshals resources for innovative women's rights organizations in 162 countries around the world. Nothing in the United States, I learned during dinner. Some activities in Europe, but mostly activities focusing on women in the poorest parts of the world. And we all know that it's those women and their fate that will predict how well the world collectively does in moving out of poverty and into the 21st century. She's done a great job during her short tenure at the Global Fund, raising their annual disbursements from $6 million to over $15 million last year. She got her schooling on the East Coast, but we're going to allow her on the West Coast for this talk. First at Mount Holyoke College, and then later on at Princeton, where she got a master's degree in International Development and Public Policy from the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs. She's an accomplished author and has received many, many awards, including most recently the Women of Substance Award from the Africa Women's Development Fund, and in 2005, the Juliet Gordon Low Award. And in her spare time, she sits on a number of boards and foundations that I'm not going to list in detail, but trust me, it's pretty impressive. Kavita was born and raised in India. She speaks Urdu, Hindi, German, French, and Spanish, and fortunately, she also speaks English. And I'm hoping, for my sake at least, that that's the language that she's going to pick tonight to give most of her presentation. And so, with no further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Kavita Ramdas.
thank you, David. He didn't make me talk to him in any of those languages, only English. And he did actually let me have some dinner. So thank you very much. I'm actually going to wait and have you have the pleasure of watching what a small amount of money can actually do. We're presenting a video that was made by a grantee of the Global Fund for Women. It's known as Breakthrough for Human Rights, an organization based in India, but also working out of the United States that uses popular media and communications as a way of conveying messages around women's human rights. And I think this is not what you think of when you think grassroots women's human rights organization. And so we thought we'd shake things up a little bit by introducing you to what won India's equivalent of an MTV Video Award 2 years ago.
मन के मंजीरे आज खनकने लगे, भूले थे चलना कदम थिरकने लगे, अंग अंग बाजे मृदंग सा सुर मेरे जागे, सांस सांस में बास बास में धुन कोई साजे, गाए मुझको आने लगा है खुद पे ही एतबार, खुद पे ही एतबार। बादल तक झूले मेरे पहुंचने लगे, आंखों के आगे गगन सिमटने लगे, ताल ताल पे ताल ताल दे झूठे हवाएं, खेत खेत में रेत रेत ने फैला दी बाहें, हाय रे सिंदूरी सुबह आई, धुलती जाए सियाही रातों की रातों की रातों की रातों की। खोले जो दरवाजे तो देखा हर शय थी नहाई, उजली उजली सी थी मेरी तन्हाई रे, बदली बदली सी बदली मेरे अंगना में थी छाई, वीरानी रानी बनके मेरे पास आई, अपनी नजर से मैंने देखी दुनिया की रंगोली, मुझको बुलाने आई मौसम की टोली, खोली आंखों की खोली मैंने पाई अपनी बोली, मुझ में ही रहती थी मेरी हमजोली रे, सुन लो अब नया अकेली हूँ मैं, अपनी सहेली हूँ मैं, साथी हूँ अपनी मैं, साथी हूँ अपनी मैं। के मंजीरे आज खनकने लगे, भूले थे चलना कदम थिरकने लगे, अंग अंग बाजे मृदंग सा सुर मेरे जागे, सांस सांस में बास बास में धुन कोई साजे, गाए दिल ये गाने लगा है, मुझको आने लगा है खुद पे पहुंचने लगे आंखों के आगे गगन सिमटने लगे गाल गाल पे ताल ताल पे झूठे हवाएं खेत खेत में रेत रेत में फैलाती बाहें हाय रे सिंदूरी सुबह आई धुलती जाए सियाही रातों की रातों की रातों की रातों की
So why do I believe that what's good for women's bodies is good for the body politic? Let me begin by painting a few pictures for you. I thought I'd pick 3. Over 20 years ago, in a small village in the state of Bihar, one of India's poorest in northeast India, an 18-year-old college student, me, watched girls half my age carry heavy pots of water for miles. They'd been up since 4 a.m. along with their mothers, gathering water and firewood, feeding the animals and preparing food for their families. Women and girls do 2/3 of the world's labor. Yet they are not treated as valuable natural resources. They remain amongst the poorest of the poor, and good health for most of them remains a very distant dream. Fast forward to August of 2003, I'm in Kabul, actually a little bit outside of Kabul in Afghanistan, in a small room in a clinic on a dusty road. The doctor turns from her patient, the 35-year-old mother of 7 children, who's already had 12 pregnancies, to smile at me. This is the first time in her life she has ever seen a doctor before her birth, she says proudly. We have a chance to change that reality for women across Afghanistan if we invest in what matters most for women's lives: healthcare, education, employment. And 2 years later, last October, in Cambodia, I'm sitting on the ground with a group of young women garment workers. They sew our Levi's jeans. They make the towels we buy at Bed Bath & Beyond. They're attending a workshop on HIV/AIDS prevention and education. They giggle as the health worker shows them how to use a condom. But then one of them, the young woman the Global Fund made a grant to start a workers' organizing effort to get young women to run for union positions, stands up and says, "Until our voices are heard and our boyfriends take us seriously, it won't matter if you teach us how to use this. Will you teach us how to speak up? Will you help us if they hit us?" No one is giggling now. In the past few months, the world has seen some amazing changes in the governance of some pretty impressive countries. Rwanda leads the world with 48% of women in parliament. In recent elections in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and Palestine, women have stood for and been elected to office in ever larger numbers. Liberia, Chile, Jamaica, and Germany just elected women as heads of their nations. President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf in Liberia has already enacted legislation to decrease the prevalence of rape. Michelle Bachelet, a pediatrician by training and by practice, has appointed Chile's first cabinet in which there is equal representation of both men and women. And in Jamaica, the first woman prime minister, Portia, what a wonderful name that is, Portia Simpson Miller, has pledged to further encourage female participation in government and decision-making by mainstreaming gender into development and taking women's needs into account when planning. This is amazingly good news, and it should make us feel very proud. Unfortunately, it doesn't change the fact that worldwide, more women between the ages of 15 and 44 die from violence than from cancer, malaria, traffic accidents, and war combined. In every society, in every religious tradition, in every culture, women's lives and women's health is threatened by domestic violence, by harmful traditions like early marriage, dowry deaths, female genital circumcision or mutilation. And in many countries, these practices and biases are further reinforced by discriminatory laws that prevent women and girls from having control over their own bodies, from being economically independent, or having the opportunity to participate in any kind of civic and public life. As long as this remains a reality, our aspirations for a democratic world and any kind of a healthy body politic will remain unrealized. The people of Afghanistan learned this lesson in a rather harsh and brutal fashion under the regime of the Taliban. For years, women's rights groups inside Afghanistan and here in many different parts of the West had been calling attention to the brutal gender apartheid that was practiced in that country. And for almost 5 years, until the shocking tragedy of 9/11, the world looked the other way. By then, it was almost too late. And it was only because of the courage and tenacity of the women of Afghanistan themselves that some semblance of civil society survived in that society. Today, they, like countless other women before them in Rwanda, in Bosnia, in Somalia, are painstakingly restoring the social fabric that years of war and conflict have torn apart. And in conflict zones, as women regain some semblance of personal health, safety, and control over their own bodies, so they are demonstrating how advancing gender equality, reducing violence and poverty, and investing in the health of women and girls is indeed good for the health of society at large. At the Global Fund for Women, we know that at their core, the current global health crises, whether they be HIV/AIDS, high maternal and infant mortality rates, are crises fundamentally of inequality. Not just the inequality between rich and poor countries, but between rich and poor inside countries and between men and women within those countries. 2/3 of the poor around the world, including in this country, are women and children. Yet, funnily enough, despite this sort of grim reality, the wonderful thing about this is that women are also key to the transformation that we want to see in our societies. A truly untapped resource that is waiting for us to release and full of the most extraordinary potential. We, I think, as an organization that funds women's human rights organizations around the world, are extraordinarily privileged to be able to be given some glimpses into the world that might be possible if we actually did this. Did what? Invest in women, invest in their health, invest in their safety, invest in their independence, in their education, in their skills and their ability to contribute to society, whether as doctors and teachers, as farmers and scientists, as mothers and public health educators. Not convinced? Need some statistics? Few statistics. I said it before, women do 2/3 of the world's labor. Why would we want the labor resources of our world to be chronically malnourished, sickened by anemia and other diseases, and ravaged by the scars of too many and too early pregnancies? 600 million women worldwide are illiterate. Yet the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund and Lawrence Summers, despite what else he might have to say about educational abilities of women, have pointed out that each additional year of education for a woman results in a 5 to 10% decrease in the mortality rate of children under 5. It also improves the health of children. There have actually been studies measuring the upper circumference of the arm of a child, which is how you measure malnutrition, and comparing those additional inches to additional years of a woman's education. And although girls make up more than 50% of all the children in the world that don't go to school, we know that if a girl finishes elementary school, her likelihood of contracting AIDS drops by 50%. When a woman can read at a 5th grade level, her children are twice as likely to survive childhood. And each year, close to 600,000 women, about 2 to 3 times the amount of people who lost their lives in the terrible tsunami of 2004, lose their lives in childbirth and pregnancy-related complications, most of which are easily avoidable. If all women had access to family planning, information, and basic contraception, we could avert 52 million unintended pregnancies a year and save the lives of over 500,000 women. Yet, over 200 million women worldwide have absolutely no access to any hope of family planning services. And recent decisions by our government have made that even less likely, making an already difficult burden on women even more complicated. If women are healthy and can make their own choices about how household income is invested, it turns out they use it to benefit the family as a whole. It goes to pay for school books and fees and sneakers for bare feet and new shoes and vaccinations and checkups. That's good for society, girls, boys, men, women. So if the statistics are compelling, and important organizations like the World Bank and the IMF and the UN clearly have proven that educating girls and raising the status of women are the most powerful ways to address poverty, child and maternal mortality, and the spread of AIDS and other diseases, why doesn't the money follow the rhetoric? It's a good question. We still spend billions more on building and updating our weapons of mass destruction, making sure we have the best state-of-the-art defenses against, I don't know, Star Wars or the future of Star Wars or the next generation of nuclear weapons. It's not even comparable to what we put into investing in women's leadership, creativity, and knowledge of community. You might have been impressed when David said we were the largest foundation supporting women's human rights. But you wouldn't be so impressed if you knew that last year, that largest foundation gave away less than $8 million, 7.4 to be precise, for the 6 billion people who live on this earth, of whom we know at least 51% are women. That is a very, very small drop in the ocean. The Global Fund for Women was created by 3 determined and slightly crazy women who were convinced that they could swim upstream and try to change this trend. That's the reason the Global Fund was created almost 20 years ago. So for the past 18 years, we've supported thousands of women-led human rights organizations and community-based organizations that are actually doing the hard work of challenging harmful cultural traditions and unjust laws, by raising the self-confidence and self-esteem of girls, by ensuring equal access to health services and education, empowering girls economically, and ceaselessly striving to change our assumption that violence is the best way to settle arguments, whether at home or in the world. How do they do this? I'm going to share some examples because I think the best stories are the real ones from the ground. They do it by raising awareness. That's one strategy. by involving the community in identifying and addressing gender inequalities and health problems. In Malawi, the National Women's Lobby and Rights Group initiated a national campaign to recruit traditional leaders. Traditional leaders are usually men in most communities, to publicly acknowledge the role of gender-based violence in the spread of HIV/AIDS amongst women. In India, a similar strategy was used by making the kinds of videos that we showed earlier to be able to raise awareness amongst a broader section of the community than would ordinarily be affected by being in women's studies programs or being in programs where they were normally used to talking about issues like this. And most recently, there's been a campaign by the same group, Breakthrough, using very famous Indian cricket stars who are sort of like your football stars or baseball stars, talking about what does it mean to be a man, and does a man use violence to settle issues or concerns or express his frustration. So in Malawi, this group initiated a national campaign to recruit traditional leaders to acknowledge the role of gender-based violence in the spread of HIV/AIDS amongst women. The result was a pledge to decrease violence against women, deeply committed to also increasing women's participation in politics. Now, why the body politic? Why does it matter if women are in those places making decisions? It turns out they really care about a whole set of issues that don't get addressed otherwise when women's voices aren't at the table. They lobbied for and succeeded in getting 27 women to run for and get elected into the parliament in Malawi during the May 2004 parliamentary elections, and encouraged the president of Malawi to raise the number of women appointed as principal secretaries in the public sector and civil service. In recognition of the group's contribution to political life in Malawi, the group's executive director has been asked to join a consultancy team that is reviewing Malawi's new constitution, which is in the process of being developed. Not a lot of money, 3 Global Fund grants over 4 years, totaling $34,000. A lot of impact. Another strategy is they provide training programs that build the individual's ability to communicate and negotiate on their own behalf and on behalf of their communities. The young woman in Cambodia who said, yes, but will you teach us how to speak up? Will you teach us how to negotiate the decisions we make? The Rural Development Organization in Bangladesh provides workshops to rural women on nutrition, on maternal health, on family planning and the prevention of HIV/AIDS, but also waterborne diseases like cholera and dysentery that kill off millions of people across the world. The group also trains women in fish cultivation to increase their incomes and decrease women's deficiencies in protein, which make them much more vulnerable to a whole set of other diseases. But they also think participation in the body politic is as important as healthy bodies. So they've been training women elected to local governance in the village councils and panchayats of Bangladesh and provide voter education to all women who participate in their health programs. We made them 1 grant so far. They've used $5,000 to do all of this in the last year. A third strategy is the whole strategy of working with customs and traditions that are harmful and that people accept as given in their cultures. I'm going to say a little bit more about this because I'm often asked by people, how can the Global Fund for Women go into foreign countries and do things against the culture of those people? They are not used to this. They don't think about women's rights. And I have to remind people for a second about the United States of America. When did women get the right to vote in this country? I don't hear you. 1920s. That's less than 100 years ago. Did it happen because one day the framers of our amazing Constitution woke up and said, oops, we forgot. We can't have a democracy in which we don't include black people and women. That doesn't really count as a democracy. No, it actually happened because the people who weren't included started raising hell. And started raising hell in ways that were deeply uncomfortable for the people in their lives, their loved ones, their families, their husbands, their brothers, their fathers, and everybody else outside of those families, and in hundreds of countries across the world today, that is exactly what women are doing. They are raising uncomfortable questions, like the young Sikh woman who sat at the table this afternoon at the meeting that I had with high school students and said to me, so would it be okay if I said to my mother that the way in which her brother treats their son is so different than the way they treat their daughter? Because I think that somebody has to say something. That's how it starts. Somebody says something. Somebody runs away. A group of young girls ran away from a female genital cutting ceremony in Uganda to an aunt's house who said that they could stay there until they could work out a way to persuade their mothers and their aunts that they didn't want to go through this ceremony. So changing cultures doesn't happen because somebody comes from outside and tells you that you need to change the culture. It happens because no culture is static and because cultures change all the time. They are fluid and are impacted by so many different things that happen from outside. In Mali, the Association Malienne pour suivi l'orientation de pratiques traditionnelles, which is a group working on traditional practices, addresses this issue of female genital cutting. 91% of all girls and women in Mali have been cut in one form or another. Many suffer from incredible medical problems related to this, and all of you have heard the horrendous stories of fistulas and other things, while many more experience serious complications during childbirth, which not only endangers their health, but also the health of the unborn child and the children who do survive. According to this group, traditions, prejudices, and women's inferior status all contribute to the persistence of FGC or FGM in Mali. With 3 grants from the Global Fund for Women, the group has worked over a 5-year period to convince 35 local villages to abandon the practice of FGM altogether. They've also helped care for hundreds of women who've suffered from complications related to cutting. And to build women's economic independence, because it turns out, as I found out on one of my trips to Ethiopia, when women said, you come and talk to us about the concern you have for female genital mutilation. Do you realize more girls in Ethiopia die because of lack of access to clean drinking water? If you were as outraged at the lack of drinking water as you are about female genital mutilation, then maybe we could listen to you and take you seriously. Do you understand why we cut? And I'm sort of sitting there going, no, I want to understand, tell me. And she said, because there is no economic security for a girl in a village in Ethiopia unless she is married, and no one will marry her unless she has been cut to prove her purity. And until you can come and tell me that there will be education opportunities for our daughters and jobs after that, and real economic choices and the ability to stand on their own feet so that being married is not the only option, until then, we will do what we need to do if it's a choice between going through something that we know hurts. You don't have to tell us that it hurts. We've suffered the consequences. But that can ensure that our child will eat for the rest of her life. So looking at the economic underlying consequences of all of this, or looking at the fact that who does the cutting in villages? 9 times out of 10, in most parts of Africa, it's widows who are the cutters, who are the circumcisers. Why? Because that's the only job that they have in which to sustain themselves. They're not allowed to inherit land, they don't have control over property, and nobody will take care of them. This is their job. So many of the women's groups that the Global Fund supports are also looking to provide alternative means of employment to the people who do this work, because that too is related to gender inequality in those societies. To build women's economic independence, the group in Mali has provided microloans and literacy classes to over 1,500 women and helped women participate in health seminars. But there's also services that groups provide. And I know lots of you who do this work get asked a lot, oh, but shouldn't we be doing transformative work, advocacy work, how does the provision of direct services really make a difference? And David and I were talking about this a little while earlier this evening. And in fact, there are instances where neither the public sector, that is the government, nor the private sector delivers the services that are desperately needed in many of these places. So organizations provide health services, including counseling, safe and accessible reproductive health care, family planning information, contraceptives, and the training of peer health information providers. In Papua New Guinea, a program called the Women's Rural Advance Program is an indigenous women's group located in the highlands of Papua New Guinea and received a grant from the Global Fund to do an expansive HIV/AIDS awareness raising program for women and girls in 20 very remote tribal communities. Through the program, they trained a female representative from each community to act as a village counselor and a workshop facilitator, to talk about condom use, to talk about honesty and gender roles within partners and between partners, and family planning. They reached over 16,000 people last year through services that included free medical testing, condom distribution, support for those stigmatized by the virus, and care for women and children living with AIDS and orphaned by AIDS. But they are also advocates, because you can't provide these resources and not want to change the way the world is. So they make trouble in their communities, and we help them make trouble in their communities. They advocate for accessibility of treatment and preventive technologies, for women's rights to health and safety. Global health is not a privilege, it is a human right that should be guaranteed to each one of us. And they lobby for legislative changes that protect women's health. For example, the Colectivo Juvenil Decide in La Paz, Bolivia, has the goal to influence and promote amongst youth a citizenship of justice, equity, and respect around the issue of sexual rights and reproductive rights as a part of human rights. Decide is the only youth-led organization in La Paz that deals directly with issues of sexual and reproductive health and rights from a youth perspective. Along with other activities, the group advocates for changes in abortion legislation in Bolivia, where abortion is currently illegal. For those of you who want to take a look at what life in a community is like where abortion, all kinds of abortion, are absolutely forbidden, I strongly recommend the last Sunday's New York Times magazine, which has a stunning front page article about El Salvador, another part of the world where the Global Fund makes a number of grants to women's rights groups, but where all forms of abortion are illegal and where it is a felony to be a doctor providing any kind of support for a woman, either undergoing an abortion or even for complications ensuing after an abortion. It's really worth looking at very clearly, particularly as we begin to deal with the realities of what South Dakota has just implemented as law. They address environmental problems. That's another strategy, such as chemical pesticides, deforestation, lack of access to clean drinking water that jeopardize women's health. For example, Eco Women in Kunming province in China. Eco Women was the first women's group in China to address the link between pesticide use and women's health and labor in the public and private sectors. Founded to, and I quote from their application, rouse up and green up Chinese housewomen, the group has built an effective network for educating and training women in pesticide-related risks to health and environment, pesticide reduction action, organic food consumption, and organic agriculture. Understanding the benefits of community-driven activism and collaboration, Eco Women has now also been a founding member of the Green Action Network, which is a national Chinese public education, consumer action, and legislative advocacy organization. We're particularly proud of Eco Women because they received a seed grant from the Global Fund, their first ever from a foreign donor or any kind of donor in 2001. The organization's yearly budget that year was $400. They've now grown to an organization with a budget of $30,000. We've made 3 grants during that time totaling $36,000. If we want to change, we can see that women's groups have strategies for change. If we want healthy communities, we can see that women's groups have provided us examples of how you can get there. We heard recently from a group that we support talking to us about the devastating impact of what are known as structural adjustment policies, or the economic policies allegedly promoting free markets around the world, somehow requiring poor countries to remove their subsidies while we rich countries continue to subsidize our farmers, but requiring Indian farmers or Ghanaian farmers or Malawi farmers to no longer be subsidized, to not subsidize healthcare, to not subsidize food, to not subsidize many of the basic rights that citizens across the world should expect to be rights. The quote from this group says, "When we think of our situation under structural adjustment, we see that there are three types of people in the world. There are the drummers, also known as the donors. There are those who applaud, intermediary groups, governments, research organizations, and then there are the dancers, and that is us, that is women. Since the beginning of structural adjustment policies, only one thing has changed. We women are dancing a different step. We are changing our step each time they change their policies. The only way we can change this is for women ourselves to become the drummers." We believe that it is high time for women to be drummers, that they're doing a fine job and have a great tune to which we can all march, and that it is time for women to take their place at the decision-making tables, to set policies that will be good for them, that will be good for their kids, that will be good for us all. And there are things that we can do to make this happen. So I have a to-do list. That's my next thing. What you can do. Consider how you can support strategies that allow women to become drummers, to support their own rights, and to set their own rhythm. Educate yourself about the challenges facing women, and that means men allies as well. I can't tell you in how many parts of the world over men are so important in women's struggle to be free and equal partners in this work. In Kosovo, the women's groups we fund would never have been able to get young girls to go to secondary school without amazing fathers of daughters who stepped up and said, "I want my daughter to be educated, not to be married at the age of 11. In Pakistan, I visited women's schools in which brothers have stood outside the school as people have thrown stones at a girl's school, saying that girls do not deserve an education, and said, "You should be ashamed if you, as a brother or as a father, are not making sure that your sister or your mother or your daughter isn't getting an education." So that kind of partnership is incredibly important, and it's one that we need more than ever in a world in which I get asked the question, why is there a global fund for women? Is there a global fund for men? We need to educate ourselves about the reality of the challenges facing women, and to understand that when women do well, all of us do well. Now, despite the fact that my husband and daughter are watching American Idol even as I speak, I'm sure, right now, he would be the first person to say, when I come home sometimes disheartened at one more depressing story, that this is not a struggle we fight just for women. This is a struggle we fight for all of us. We can no longer ask the question that was asked in the early years of the feminist movement, "Let us onto your playing field. Let us play the game." We must ask the question, what kind of game? What is this game where 2/3 of the world's population lives on less than $2 or $3 or $4 a day? What kind of a game in which we spend more money on weapons that can destroy all of us from here to eternity than we do on education and healthcare? What kind of a game in which we think the gains for one of us, one group of us, means the loss for somebody else. And collectively, we, men and women, must figure out a way in which to ask ourselves what world we envision and what the rules will be for all of us to play as equal partners. We need to travel. I am deeply concerned as I travel around the world, and I know that it is hard to be an American in the world sometimes. But I think now more than ever, the rest of the world needs to see a face of this country that is the face I have come to know and love for 22 years. That is the face of the over 16,000 individual donors who make contributions to the Global Fund every year. That is the face of the young kids who I met with today from Seattle schools who wanted to know if they could start a club for the Global Fund for Women in their school. And I said, yes, that would be fabulous. It is unbelievably important that we do not retreat into a place of isolation. This is not the moment of time. We need to be in the world, and we need to be in the world as equal partners with the world, not dominating over it, but opening ourselves up to learn from and be with the rest of the world. And that opportunity, I think, we have in huge quantities just by simply being able to go out and travel and visit. Share that information amongst yourselves. What are your strategies for networking and best practices? Value your democracy. Women are putting their lives on the lines for it. In Rwanda, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and here we vaguely think that we have to show up for one or two, elections. Contact your congressman, ask them about the Convention for Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women and why the United States and Somalia are the only two countries in the world that haven't signed it. Find out, say it matters to you. Urge them to insist that when international funding institutions do loans to countries, that they ask, how much money is going to defense versus education? Ask them about how much that matters to you. Tell them that it makes a difference. If you engage with these kinds of things, I think we can all collectively hope to find ways that we can get involved. Get involved with the organizations that are here tonight. There are incredible tables and opportunities for you to find ways to be involved. And then lastly, don't think that writing a check isn't good enough. The Global Fund was started by 3 women who put in $500 of their own money. Today, hundreds of grantee organizations, including women in Nepal who send us 2 rupees each, and women in Kosovo who send $40 every year, have put money into this collective pool that is now this biggest international fund for women's human rights. And many of you in this audience, I know, have supported things that you care about. Writing a check matters. We live in the wealthiest country in the world. It matters. $50 sends a kid to school for a whole year in Afghanistan. That's 10 lattes, as I told the kids. You can do that. We can all do that. And you don't have to feel like, well, that's really not enough. I want to do more. Sure, do more. But start with the check. It's a good place. And encourage others to do it too. We tithe, we make a difference. It's a difference that makes all the difference in the world to the organizations that we're able to support. And we can't do it without each other and without your support. Thank you so much.